council special or study session for October 30th. Call to order. First thing I'm going to propose adding 3 things to the agenda, although 3 of them may not be needed. A public input on business items 1, 2, and 3, if there's anyone here to do that, and an open discussion before adjournment of the council. So, we good adding those items?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Okay, first business item, this is Craig's probably get set up. We'll move to.
Well, we're close. I'm gonna hand it off to Mark.
Yeah, I'm just gonna hold this so you can see it.
Are you serious?
That'd be awesome.
Oh my
What a
God.
team player you are. Turn it right side.
There it is.
Sort of.
That's what you guys get for having an executive session before we can set up here.
Yeah.
You could have set it up before the two sessions.
So,
No, they
you
wasn't
want to share
there.
one?
Yeah,
It
He's
was
gonna
using
sit
it.
on-
If we had more than one of these, we could have.
Oh, he has a clicker. Okay.
That doesn't work. I figure, yeah.
Yeah, here's a clicker.
I've had to do that before.
I know.
Easy to go with that meeting.
Be honest. The first business agenda is the biosolids, or is that correct, Craig? Or you
That is
wanna-
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mark was with us while we start. Pardon me? But just see if you can take it for me. Go, Mark.
Never mind, Mark. I can recall it for now. Unless you got it.
That's true.
Yeah.
No,
I
no.
got it. Okay. Okay. Sorry for the technical
No problem.
difficulties.
Thank you for getting it up and running.
Okay, biosolids discussion to start with. Really just wanted to open it up for any questions. I do have quite a few questions from the council on biosolids. I don't know if you would like me to try to address those and answer those questions before we open it up for more questions.
Yeah, I'd
Would
say
that be
you already have
acceptable?
some, go ahead and go through them.
So the first question is accepting of digested sludge and how it impacts the total capacity of the plant. And the answer to that is after, obviously with the tour that we did, we tried to educate the council members of how the process works. So if you remember, we had the headworks up there, the first building furthest to the south of the plant. That is where all of the inflow comes in. So when we take in digested sludge, it goes into the actual digester, goes directly to the centrifuge. What happens after that, we take all of the water, most of the water out of that digested sludge, which does in fact go back into the system, but it doesn't go through the headworks. So anything that doesn't go through the headworks doesn't count towards our average daily flow. So it doesn't count against our total maximum daily allowance for inflow. It goes right back into the anoxic tanks because it is already treated. It's already been screened off. Everything, most of what would be the larger grit would have already been taken off of it, so it goes right back into the anoxic tanks. The water is then taken back out. It is run back through that portion of the lower system. So It does not count against our total daily maximum flow. The next question is pre-delivery testing. Pre-delivery testing is done by an outside lab performed by the agency that's bringing us the digested sludge. That is written into all of our contracts that we have in place now. Those are delivered to us before the delivery is actually taken. So the analysis of that testing is done before we ever receive that digested sludge. And again, that is done by an independent lab. And then the results are submitted to us.
Do you have, I assume you do, have confidence that testing is well done? Because once it gets to our plant, if there's something in that load or loads, we will be liable for that.
Correct.
So are we confident in that testing, that it's well done and you can't eliminate risk, but significantly reduce any of our risk?
I don't think you can completely eliminate risk like you stated, but certainly the labs that they are processing it through are credible labs. They're labs that we have used in the past. There's only a couple of them in Olympia. Those are the testing labs that we're getting results from. Now, yes, could an outside agency or another, either county or city, pull a sample from something that they're not delivering to us? Absolutely. But we are relying on, these are other public agencies. We aren't taking any private sewage at this point. They are all public agencies, so we would certainly feel that all of those public agencies are above board and pulling samples off of what they're actually bringing us. So
Yeah.
a very, I guess, confident,
No way of testing them before, after they come, before we take care of them.
we run our own test once it gets to us, but we've already, as the mayor stated, we've already received it at that point. So if we did have a problem, it would be our liability, but we certainly would catch it before it got too much further into the system or even to the dryer. So we certainly run our own tests through that with the digested sludge. So, you're welcome.
Craig, just a question on the dryer that you mentioned. So what's the heat of the dryer? How hot does it cook that stuff?
It's about 250 degrees in the dryer.
For how long a period of time?
Okay, quiz, council members. Does anybody remember what Brett said?
Because I wasn't there at that time.
Yeah, I don't remember. I actually don't remember what the contact time was in the
Alright.
dryer, to be completely
Long
honest
enough to
with
cook
you.
a raw chicken to fully done.
Well, we're cooking all the contaminants out of that digested sludge and making it into Class A biosolids. So
All right.
we're cooking all of those contaminants out of it. So enough contact time to get that done.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So what I'm hearing, Craig, just real quick, what I'm hearing is that the sludge is pre-treated and pre-tested before we receive it.
That is correct.
Okay, that's pretty simple.
That is correct. So, fourth question was relating to the UV bank and the amount of treatment or pre-treatment before any effluent is discharged into the bay. And we do have a capital budget request in, and one of the questions was the cost of that. The capital budget request is for 2 additional UV modular banks at a total cost of $70,000. That was actually approved in the 2018 budget. The sheets were all submitted and it was approved, but never made it actually into the sewer budget for 2018. So this will be our second try to actually get it into the budget, but it was approved for 2018.
What does that mean, though? So it was approved, it didn't make it in the budget, meaning?
We had quite a few things from former finance director that were approved by the commission and the final budget, and just didn't make it in a dollar amount into
The money wasn't
that.
transferred?
Correct.
On
Yeah, okay.
It just was not assigned.
On the tour, I
thought that you'd said, or Clint had said, that we double UV that stuff right now already.
We do, yeah.
So we need 2 more to quadruple?
It's a backup.
Okay.
It literally is for redundancy, and it does provide another level of contact where we're really trying to take care of any contaminants that we're putting into the bay.
So we'll use all 4?
Yes,
Regardless
absolutely.
whether we have a sludge contract or not, we would use all 4?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was something that Brent has been asking for a while. And whether we were processing digested sludge from outside sources or not.
Okay.
And really, that's just to protect our waterway out into Oakland Bay.
Just like those awards you get every year.
We do, we do.
So
We take pride in those awards.
How long do those UV banks last?
Those UV banks have been in there for 8 years now. They are starting to age a little bit. So overall lifespan of those is really, I mean, depends on, I'm guessing it's probably upwards of 15 years.
Okay.
But certainly, anytime those start to get over a decade old, you're gonna start to run into some problems.
And assume replacement costs would be approximately
The
70
same,
per bank.
about 75, or about 35,000 a bank.
Okay.
Yeah. And then another question that came, I think, more out of the tour of the plant was the norovirus and the outbreak that we have had a couple of years ago, so recently, and the ability to test for noro. And we actually went through Department of Ecology and found one lab that we're aware of, that Department of Ecology is aware of, on the West Coast. They're out of California. They do the test, and the cost is $900 plus shipping, and it is a 6-week return time. So that certainly is something that we could start to test for, but certainly there's going to be some financial impact with that.
The state tested us for that though, correct?
What's
The
that?
state has tested us for that, correct?
The feds have tested us?
The state.
The state has not tested us. The feds have tested us. They came in and did a study that did go through a federal lab
Okay.
when they did do that last test. But that was on a one-time basis that they did that. Yeah, if we were to.
And that showed that we weren't producing any of the virus.
That's correct. That's correct.
Do you know, what I've read is it takes a large volume of sample. Do you know how much water they would need for it?
What the sample size is, I do not know what the sample
So the
size is.
shipping may be
Could be an
costly.
issue. Yeah.
5 gallon drum.
I have a question, would the county be a partner in this since the residents that live on the bay where the water goes out into are county residents, basically? Is there a chance of the county going in partnership to have this tested or not? Or do they do their own testing further out?
I would doubt that the county wants to partner with us to prove that the city doesn't have any
Well,
fault in what issues we've had in Oakland Bay, and
how does the county respond? Has there been any conversation on that water out, further out in the county?
not necessarily the water, but they certainly have done a lot of investigation with their on-site sewage systems, or on-site septic systems. They have worked with a lot of the property owners up and down the inlet
Okay.
and Oakland Bay to ensure that those on-site septic systems are functioning properly.
Do they go out and check the water out in front of these homes at all?
I don't know what their process is. I don't believe so, but I think they are doing some septic tests.
Okay, all right,
But I don't think the actual water,
okay,
but I don't know for sure.
all right.
But the bottom line is, what we learned is everything is absolutely at or above state and federal standards for all environmental and public health testing.
That's correct.
I was very
Yeah.
impressed with the tour.
So-
I was more impressed that our city manager drank the water.
You know what,
He's doing
Still
just
here.
fine.
John that used to manage the plant, when I took a tour with him 5, 6 years ago, he held his glass in and sort of let go.
And he didn't die.
He did not die, he did not get sick.
Didn't get sick.
No.
That's right.
So,
Neither did I.
anyway, yeah.
I've had worse water around the country.
Out of the tap, right?
Out of the tap, that's right.
Flint, Michigan.
So you have something more?
I guess really all I was gonna comment on is taking on increased load into the system. One thing that was very clear is it is a very expensive operation, and having spare parts on the shelf for those things that may go down is something probably to be looking at. So I guess if these budget requests that didn't go through or things didn't happen, it'd be interesting to look into making sure that we have adequate equipment on site. So if for one of those reasons, one of those UV lights or a pump or something like that, not that we have to have a complete separate wastewater treatment plant on the shelf, that's not what I'm getting at, but those critical components, I would say, having a good plan in place, be it an emergency contract or something, to be able to enact to get maintenance done or something else. It sounds like there's a lot of redundancy already there, which is good, but again, taking on additional load, kind of understanding what's actually going on, but taking on that additional material. Just want to make sure that if something goes down, we're postured to be able to remedy it very quickly.
And with the income or revenue we're bringing in, we should be able to do that. Is what you're asking about $500,000 a year now with all of them together?
No, I don't think we were that much. I think we were about $250,000.
Well, I thought you said.
And it's essentially it's recouping our costs, is that correct, Craig?
That's correct. If I'm gonna try and load some things up. I've got them, hopefully I can get to my desktop on this at this point, and it doesn't take me too long. But just some of those things, I guess, yes, we are recouping costs. I was gonna show you the actual breakdown of what we did back in 2015.
I have one question.
Sure.
Before I forget it.
Sure.
Warranties on those parts. What if we stock up on these parts and is there a warranty on those? So if they sit on the shelf, if it's a 2-year warranty, 5-year warranty, we don't use those up, is the warranty up or is it after you start using those?
We don't keep anything on the shelf that would have a warranty.
No.
No, any of
Well,
those.
you were talking about stocking up, keeping things on hand.
There's quite a bit of redundancy with like pumps and things down at the
Okay.
plant, that if something goes out, there is a backup.
Okay.
And that is just the nature of the wastewater treatment plant. That you have to have those fail-safes in place. But anything that would have a warranty, like a $100,000 pump, we are not keeping on the shelf.
Right, okay.
But there's normally a backup in place that if one goes down, it's just like our booster pump stations. Same thing, Nealon Park Booster Pump Station has 3 pumps in it. We normally function with 1. The Front Street Booster Pump Station has 5. We can get by with a couple, unless it's really heavy flows. So you can see where that redundancy is, and we exercise those and go through a series of systems where we're turning those on and off periodically, so that is that they're functioning as one, but they're rotating through all of those as you know, on a daily maintenance, I guess, process. Those are all functioning at some interval throughout a day, a week, a year.
Which would even out the wear and tear on the equipment.
Correct.
Okay.
And really, so they're all wearing at the same rate also.
The one other thing that, sorry, I forgot, with the equipment side of running the wastewater treatment plant that was brought up, for those who weren't on the tour, the SCADA equipment, supervisory control and data acquisition, basically all the sensors and modules that allow the operators of the wastewater treatment plant to monitor what's going on, and when, they're hours responses if an alarm were to go off or some issue were to happen, they can access that information remotely. That is aging. We were told that the servers are pretty old in there, and I looked in the server rack and it's old. That being said, that equipment shouldn't really be overlooked, because those are those things where if there's a fault or an issue and that equipment gets to the point where it's unsupported by the manufacturer, then you're talking about staff time on callback, call-ins, that sort of thing, and ultimately that's gonna pay for itself pretty quickly, once that sort of happens, so just to consider those sorts of budget requests to get that on kind of a cycle with, as discussed previously, an ER&R program for infrastructure and equipment like that.
Luckily, servers are inexpensive these days, it's the software that's,
Yeah, but it's the price of doing business
Yeah.
with this stuff, and I know that it's worth it, absolutely.
And Craig, I think you're getting to, but the costing reflects both the operational costs and like Joe's saying, all these replacements, not only for the IT systems and the technology, but all the pumps, that's all factored in.
That's correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
How often do you have to have these tests that you've been talking about? This $900 test plus shipping, is that once a year?
We do not have a requirement for
No requirement.
norovirus or any family of that. So we don't do them now. Yeah, we do not have a requirement to perform those.
Not that specific test. There's
Correct.
quite a number of tests that go on a daily, weekly, monthly, biannual basis,
and more than required.
much more than required in most cases.
Sorry, if you'll just hang with me just for a second. See if I can get into this. What I would do for Chuck or Tim right now.
Yeah.
So when we did do the study in 2015, things that we did.
It's cool that your desktop wasn't wide open to the World Wide Web.
Now it's going
There we go.
Ah, look at that.
Yay.
VPN, thank God.
Joe, you should be up here doing this.
I'm happy to help if this.
Their duties is assigned.
Yeah.
All right, where you at? We thought it was coming, but Joe was optimistic, but I don't know. I can only imagine what it's gonna be like when it actually gets up.
Yeah, Greg,
So-
if you want to just describe it.
Yes,
that's-
so when we did go through this, we went through everything from polymer costs to thicken sludge to manpower, actual power and gas costs. And when we did that, I looked back and I wanted to show you what we actually had really took a look at. And with the power costs, I didn't actually remember what all we had done back in 2015, but when I really looked back at it, we had stacks of paper that I didn't want to bring with me today. That's why we were trying to do this method, but obviously that must be the way to go. But when we took 9 months worth of power costs, and on a daily basis took the kilowatt hours used at the main plant, we then went through a spreadsheet, took out all holidays and weekends, highlighted all of those, then extrapolated out what the actual resting consumption of power was at the main plant. So we got that out of, because there are things that run all the time at the main plant. So some blowers, obviously, but there are, I believe there are 6 different meters at the main plant, power meters. So we went back through and looked at all of those and then broke those out and came up with a cost of actual runtime of the dryer, and actually could pull out the actual cost of that, and did the same thing with the gas, the natural gas that we use to run the dryer. But just some of those numbers that we had 2015, and keep in mind that there were increases to a lot of these services also. Power had a pretty major increase, but power costs for 2016.
What was 15? Did you say 2015 for?
No, we looked at 2015, but I'm giving you actual numbers from 2016 as a comparison to 2017. So 2016 power costs were $218,000. For 17, when we started taking a pretty good amount of biosolids, that increased by about $13,000 to $231,000. The gas actually went down slightly. Total gas consumption was 24,600, went down to 23,300. So just a slight decrease. After looking at the budget, there was no significant increase to polymer, no significant increase to the total amount of bags. The bag costs, we did use slightly more, about $740 more in bags. But just to give you a sense of where that's at, that's not taking into account manpower, the slight increase in manpower, and then the total replacement costs, which is a huge part of this. And that's what I really wanted to show you today, was that total manpower or that replacement cost, because that dryer and all of the systems within it ends up being about $2.5 million. We put a useful life of 20 years on it, but it is the majority of the per gallon cost that's fixed in a digested sludge. But to keep it, just for reference, we brought in 123,500 in 2017, with very limited amount of increase to any of our costs, except for the actual runtime of the dryer, which is replacement cost. Obviously, we've got some wear and tear, but we figured in not only the replacement cost, but a maintenance cost per year of, I want to say it was about $45,000 in maintenance costs that we looked at per year, that also have, all of those things have an inflation rate of 3% figured into those. So not only the maintenance costs, but also the total equipment costs and replacement of that also had a 3% annual increase to it. So you can see how we tried to cover all of those things, including storage, which I think I mentioned on the tour. You saw how much space we had down there that was underutilized, that now somebody else is paying for. So now we're storing, some biosolids in it and bags and some other equipment. But you can see how large that building was and how much space we were actually using.
And I mentioned that the cost, when we talked about the cost increasing or decreasing, we're also looking at the consumption. So example, the natural gas. Do we know that we brought in this much more sludge and it took this many more gallons of natural gas? Because if the price of natural gas actually was less that year, it seems an oddity.
Yeah.
So I imagine that's also something that's tracked as the consumption as well as the hard cost of it at the end of the day.
And like I said, I wish I could get into this. We pulled numbers for rate increases for PUD and natural gas, so I was hoping to show you those. There was a little bit of an oddity that natural gas actually did go down slightly. It wasn't significant, but it did go down slightly. So I'm guessing that that is why we did see a small decrease in natural gas of the $1,300, even though we were running more. But the
reason being perhaps not turning it on and off, because Brett did talk a little
Yep.
bit too about the efficiency of keeping it running. It's more efficient while it's running than during the startup.
I think Councilmember Schmidt brought that up when we were down there, and that certainly is a huge factor. And that's really, you look at these, at least these two contracts that you have in front of you now from Thurston County and Yelm. It was a very large contributing factor was economy of scale, how much they're actually bringing us. And if you see those, there are two different rates. We went back through and did an actual study of how much that is actually taking us for startup and shutdown. And if we're taking that much more material, we're not obviously starting up and shutting down as much, which is certainly helping us with overall costs. So that is the reason that you're seeing that slight reduction in cost from the Yelm contract to the Thurston County contract. And it really is economy of scale. It's just really how much they're actually bringing us. So that is about all of the information I have on biosolids. If there are any more questions, I certainly can try to answer those if there are any more.
One thing, so how much money we gotta put away every month or so, every year if you will? So that in 20 years, we don't have to come up with 2.5 million to replace the dryer.
That was in my spreadsheet, council member, but I don't know what that is if,
But you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Can we start a nest egg now, or have you already started a nest egg?
This is kind of an ongoing conversation we had about not just that capital facility, but the
Right.
Civic Center needing a new roof, shelters at the parks. I mean, there's a number of things. Asset management in general is an area we struggle with, so I'm glad to hear that we at least calculated that. Now the question is, what do we do with that information?
and what we do with those funds that are coming in. To
Right.
answer your question, that ends up being $125,000 a year for replacement. That's not including inflation. So if you add on another, even at 3%, you add on another 60% to that, compounded annually, you're probably upwards of around $200,000 a year that you really need to be putting away for full replacement of the dryer. So that is something certainly to think about, and Mike and I have talked about that recently,
But right now,
about
that's
the
not
rate
possible.
study and the things that we considered almost a year ago. We did have a rate study done by a professional FCS group that really showed us, here's what you need to do for replacement. If you defer that, here are the rate increases that you are going to need to put into place later on. So it really comes down to, where is that money going? Are we putting it into the actual operations of sewer, or are we pulling those out and reserving those? And if we're not, how do we pay for that in the future? Are we looking at double-digit rate increases when we get into years 10 through 20 to pay for that new dryer, or do we
Yeah.
start those now?
Yeah.
And that's a discussion that Mike and I have talked about bringing forward in a study session here in the next few weeks. So we will certainly bring that back and
Okay.
share that with you again, because that was a decision that was made by the commission, not by this council.
Be a good topic.
Yes. And not only for sewer, but for water also.
Yeah. Okay, any more questions for Craig?
One of the reasons why we're taking in Yelm and other locations, right, was they cannot create, they don't have anywhere to store or process to Class A, make that fertilizer because of the heightened nitrate levels at their locations. That was part of the reason why they kind of got shut down with that part, which is why we're bringing it in. We're able to then treat it. The thing to point out with that was and correct me if I'm wrong here, and I'm not a microbiologist, and I'm not gonna pretend to be one, but, I asked Brent, so I was like, okay, great, so, they got shut down for increased nitrate levels, we start bringing in all their class B to make it class A. Are our nitrate levels going to then increase, and then are we gonna be shut down from this? And what that came back to was, unless you're actively out there spreading that fertilizer on the land and it ends up in stormwater runoff and all these other issues, which we're not doing.
Right.
We are not spreading out that class A, we're sacking that up and giving it away to whomever, for their fertilizers and used to be, equitably dispersed wherever, not at the physical site, which is part of the problem that came up with the private entity in the county. They have acreage that they're spreading that class A material out at continuously in the same areas over time would, as I understand it, would raise those levels to create concern through ecology or whatever, which at those monitoring sites that they were finding were potentially elevated, still below level, but that's not what we're doing here. We're just simply processing it, storing it, getting rid of it off site. It's not something that's being disseminated out.
Correct, and it's a completely, we have got so many, the level of processing that we have is far superior to what they're doing through a lagoon system, basically bringing in raw sewage, putting it into a lagoon system, and then it's infiltrating into the groundwater. Correct.
And so we don't necessarily run the risk at the site of that occurring based on the way we're doing things.
Correct.
So that was my last concern.
Yes.
And then just one brief comment I'd like to make. I really appreciate you guys setting up that tour for the council members, and please extend our thanks to Brent again, because it was really impressive to not only gain a better understanding of how that process works, but to see how technically savvy he and his team are and how much work they've put into receiving those accreditations and ongoing education to make sure that this plant is really running in an optimal fashion. I mean, it's nice to see the awards on the wall, but it's even better to know we have people there that are working hard to make that happen, as I understand how important it is to those of us who live here. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. They certainly take a real pride in what they do. That's for sure.
Thanks, Craig.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Okay, now we'll try and load up access Shelton.
Now select shop.
There we go.
So before you move on though, the question is, would you like this item moved to the action agenda for next week?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Are we very good with
Yes.
Sounds good.
that? Okay.
Sorry, thank you, Mike. I
Yeah,
failed to
no
mention that.
No problem. Got your back.
Thank you. I'm too busy being the technical guy here today. And now I've lost half of my screen. Jeez Louise.
Oh, it's in presenter view.
All right, we're gonna roll with it. Dieter, do you know how to get out of that?
Which, what are you not seeing up there? Is this just showing?
Just the full screen.
Yeah, with the mouse.
Oh, I'm making this work.
We're all struggling today.
Oh, worse.
Now, whatever.
My wife and I were gonna go square dancing tonight at like 6
whatever.
o'clock.
I can,
We're gonna go with it.
Kevin
We're not
and
gonna
she
make
can
it.
share.
We're gonna make it.
Sorry.
What?
Councilmember Kranz, you're not going to make that. You better let her know now.
Next week, we go square dancing next week, that'll be.
So I think maybe the best way to go through this, unless anybody's got any objections to it, is to just present what we presented about 6 weeks ago, just to refresh your memory, and I will keep it short. We have added just a few things to it to address some of, I think, the questions. But certainly, once we get to the end of it, or even throughout, if you do have any questions, certainly feel free to jump in. But I'll try and go through this since you have seen it once fairly quickly. If I can, there we go. So really just strategic planning, looking forward into up into the end of 2023, and really wanted to be just really proactive to the way we are planning for not only our street projects, but really all of our funds and all of our projects that we've got out there, and addressing what those needs are, and then being able to plan for them, much like we talked about with the FCS group and those rate increases for water and sewer, but really to look at what we need and just have some strategic planning and an outlook of, because there is a lot that goes into, especially the grant funding on these with the different cycles and when those become available, especially through the federal funding, just because those are bienniums. And if you miss it, you're out a couple of years before you can hit it again. And we did just miss one for the federal cycle for Evergreen Safe Routes to schools. So that is something to keep in mind that we really wanted to plan for. And another, I guess, thing to point out of what we've done in the past is even for the planning stages and the design work that goes into these projects, we got fairly lucky with Downtown Connector project. We tried to get that out fairly quickly, and it took a lot of time and effort, all really condensed into a very short time frame. And that's not, I don't think, the way to conduct business for especially projects of that magnitude. But it was something that we did for sewer, or for Downtown Connector, and not something that we would like to do in the future. So, and that's really looking at how we're planning for these, not only for the project, but the planning phase of these. So that is where we came up with the concept of Access Shelton, and the first two phases of Access Shelton, so Downtown Connector and also Turner, have been either started or completed. Turner has been completed and closed out. Obviously, with all of the road construction, you see that Downtown Connector is still moving forward. That contractor will be in town working on the project until about Thanksgiving. Then they're going to step away from that until late winter, early spring to complete that project. So phase 1 and phase 2 already in motion. Phase 3, we did get approval to move forward with initial 10% funding level design for phase 3, and that is broken up into 2 different phases, phase 3A and B, so the 2 roundabouts on Wallace Nealon Boulevard at Shelton Springs Road and 13th Street. So moving that traffic through what right now is a fairly low functioning traffic signal and a 4-way stop that is very congested at certain hours of the day, and certainly during the holiday season. We've already seen an increase in traffic going out, heading east on Wallace Nealon Boulevard. So a lot of seasonal activity out in that area with highly increased traffic through that intersection. So looked at that with SEJ. We are on hold at this point. We wanted to wait for school to get back into session before we took traffic counts in those intersections to get to them. They did an initial analysis of the intersections with the limited information that we could provide them. They did come up with a couple of different concepts and initial costs associated with those. This is the 13th and Wallace Nealon intersection. So you can see somewhat of the concept with a slip lane and then a single lane roundabout. And this would be a full-size roundabout, not the miniature roundabout, mini roundabout that we're talking about down at First and Alder.
Would this still be traversable by truck traffic as the other ones are?
No, it would not. This would be a full-size roundabout, yeah.
Plenty of right of way.
Plenty of right-of-way, yes. We have two, if I can go back. So the area to the, what would be the left-hand upper part of the screen is all watershed property. So that would be the northwest section. Northeast section on the right-hand side is Bonneville, but we do have quite a bit of right-of-way that goes out into what is actually federal land for Bonneville. And then that lower left-hand corner is also city property also. So as Councilmember Schmidt stated, plenty of right-of-way to fit that in, and actually works into the design of this perfectly. No land acquisition, or very little land acquisition. There may be some in that northeast corner that we may need.
And it's down this.
There's a fairly large retention pond in that lower right-hand corner that butts up against the rehab center, but it's a fairly large retention pond that's there with nothing on it.
I know it's very preliminary, but a design suggestion with that center island to be as low maintenance as possible.
Absolutely.
So we're not mowing grass and having to irrigate and having to maintain the expensive landscape features.
Yes.
So,
And that, yeah. And that really falls, I've had a lot of discussions with Mark recently, even on Downtown Connector, because that design actually had grass with no irrigation on both sides of Downtown Connector, the entire distance from First Street to 7th Street. So a slight increase in cost, but I think we've come up with a much better design method and gotten rid of the grass that was going to go in there. So some real low maintenance road edge material on both sides. So you've got an 8-foot section on the north side of the road, Downtown Connector, and a 4-foot section on the south side of the road. So we've come up with a concept of really no vegetation on the south side. We do have trees, that is a tree corridor, so there are trees that are required to go in on the north side, but a lot of rock and hardscape in that area. So much better, low maintenance, no irrigation.
yeah, excellent.
Yeah. So we would certainly shoot for that in any of these. We've learned, I think, Mark and I have both learned our lesson, and the cost, I think everybody has seen with the budget constraints that we have had this year. All of our roadside and road medians went without water this year to try and save some costs. So we certainly would like to keep things looking nice with low cost. So that is a focus of ours. And then this is the Phase 3B, so the intersection at Spring Road and Wallace Nealon. So the fairly old or aging traffic signal that's there now that especially in AM and PM peak hours has some failures to it. We see a lot of traffic heading into the east, especially during the AM peak hours where there's so much traffic coming from the north. So the top right of the page coming into that intersection, that nobody can make that left-hand cross-traffic turn. So what they do now is wait for the signal to turn red, and then 1 or 2 cars just run the red light. We have looked at some additional phasing in that intersection, adding a turn arrow, but with recommendations from our traffic engineer, he thinks that the backup would become much worse because the cycling of the signal would take longer, and then you would have longer backups. So he did not recommend additional phasing in this intersection with the current traffic signal, and even doing that phasing with that current traffic signal box would be very difficult.
How long right now until the box is needing to be replaced? Do we know what the life expectancy is in that? I know it's aging.
those
Aging
things,
was the word I heard.
those things really should be changed out at about 20 years. We have several boxes within the city that are into the 30s. Especially down, we took out the box at 4th and Railroad. That box was about 35 years old. The traffic signal cabinet that is at 7th and Railroad now is, I think, 32 years old. This box, fortunately, was hit by a car about 20 years ago, and it was replaced, so it's one of our newer boxes, so, yeah, but those things, it's.
What's that? My insurance isn't gonna have to pay.
So I think we all see how quickly technology changes, and these traffic signal boxes are no different. These things, parts are obsolete in them, we just can't get them. We've actually been fortunate that we've gotten some of the state surplus hand-me-downs out of things that they don't use anymore to put back into our aging boxes to keep them functioning. So we've been pretty good at that so far.
The average signal's what, $75,000 in value?
Downtown connector is close to that, slightly more.
The other thing with this intersection right now is there's some abandoned inductive loop sensors. Those are cuts into the paved surface. That's not good, especially with new pavement. We want to avoid that because the pavement's going to be compromised at that point. So these cameras on those intersections now for signal timing and phase there, but yeah, any chance we can to, so that would eliminate technically 2 signals of flashing red and then
Yes.
the fully signalized intersection, so so that's, yeah, that'd be less overall in the city to have to be maintaining.
And really that flashing four-way stop needs one or the other treatment. It really either needs a full traffic signal.
Right.
Or it needs some other traffic control.
Yeah, yeah, that's horrible. I drive through it every day.
Again, I don't see any solution here to, in front of OBJH where kids are dodging cars on a daily basis. All you gotta do is go sit there, man, just one morning and you'll witness
I
5
have.
kids about to get hit there.
I have.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, a stop sign, or is, I mean, can these guys also add something in there, maybe a solution for that area? I mean, it's only gonna take one kid.
Well, we have had,
We've had
a couple of kids in that intersection. Stop sign wouldn't functionally work. You've got 4 lanes of traffic, so technically you couldn't put in, it would have to be a traffic signal, some sort of either a traffic signal or a roundabout.
And I imagine there's some concern with how that backs into the next couple of blocks.
Absolutely.
Coming in off the highway, and the main turns off to one.
Remember Lazy Boulevard, they got like 3 in a row.
Well, they do have 3 in a row, and that's council members' I guess point
Yeah.
is we did look at an overall corridor project, which would probably be a federally funded project, but really doing the state intersection off of 101, the first one that you hit at Wallace Nealon Olympic Highway North. We get a lot of complaints on it. It's not our intersection as of right now, but it is a failing intersection. You can look at how the curbs and the center islands have deteriorated. The signal doesn't function very well. ADA ramps are out of compliance. So we have been working with local programs. Neil Campbell in particular, who is the Olympic region engineer. So we have met with him. I meet with him about every other month. And we talk about a solution to that intersection. But then you do have quite a few more that you would have to take care of so that you don't have, because they are so closely knit together, that if you had one that was signalized and then a roundabout, you would end up having issues between the 2 of them, just because of the efficiency of a roundabout and the way they move traffic. So you would really have to do the Olympic Highway North, Wallace Nealon. You would have to do the intersection at the Chevron Walmart entrance, likely, especially with a YMCA going into the location at the junior high. and then moving out into these other two proposed intersections. The only reason for these two is they are separated from the signalized intersections. That's why we wanted to try and handle them first, and then move back towards 101 from these as we move along. But I think that's outside of that real 5-year window that we have looked at as far as access Shelton goes.
YMCA is another, you get a lot more people crossing that intersection, a lot more kids crossing.
Well, and that's certainly something that we can come back and look at, depending on where they're at and how soon that project goes. That is the concept with the Shelton Springs Road intersection, is some fairly significant TIF, traffic impact fee, at least contributing to the project. So the school of about $200,000 this year that we just invoiced them for, and then the hospital project is a little over $300,000. So I'm guessing that the size of the YMCA, that traffic impact fee is going to be a fairly significant impact fee. So that is certainly something that we can make a decision on when we get to that point and they actually put in for a building permit and pay that fee of, is there something that we want to do with that intersection in particular?
We want to see how that's engineered. You know, they're
Exactly.
gonna have to present us a traffic study for how they're gonna site the
Absolutely.
building, how they're gonna ingress, egress off of, not only Wallace Nealon, but Spring Road potentially too. So we really wanna know what they're gonna propose.
And that was a discussion that we all had, Mark and I in particular, of when they were proposing this and how they were going to address that. Is their entrance going to be on the Spring Road, which is a real problem, or is it going to be onto Wallace Nealon, which is a,
Is that even gonna be
That's a
an
problem
option?
also.
Cause isn't there a retention? Isn't there a BMP there? Like right
There-
there on
there
the.
is.
there is. If they could do some sort of sizing
Yeah.
of on-site retention or taking care of some of the other stormwater, they may try to strike a deal with the school district to use the school district's entrance.
There's just a lot up in the air right now.
Yes, there is, but those are all possibilities, but that is certainly something that we could look at that time.
What's the timeframe for 3B again?
3B, we have a transportation request that we are preparing for our legislators to ask for about half of this project. And we're proposing to use those TIF fees from the high school and the hospital for the other portion of it, with a small match from the city through our transportation funds. But we are under 10% design right now. We would really like to, and we'll get to the schedule, but I think construction we looked at for 2020.
And this one would also be a full-size roundabout.
It would be a full-size roundabout, much like the one at 13th Street, correct?
No compromises.
Yes. And there, again, is
Plenty of room.
plenty of right-of-way. Everything to the west is ours. Actually, everything to the east, the only restriction would be this small gas, I don't even know what you would call it, a junction location for the gas line that they have right in the corner of this intersection. So they would, yeah,
That's every now and then.
yeah.
I mean, this is a question we get often, I'm sure you do too, you know, what about the trucks? There's no worries that this design is something that most of our traveling public will be able to utilize without any issue because of the lane of travel and the other right-of-way issues, correct?
So the one great thing that we have done is our partnership with WashDOT and their experts. And they have been great to work with. Dennis Swires, Brian Walsh have done literally hundreds of these. And to have their input as to what works and what doesn't work and learn from their mistakes has been just phenomenal. So with that being said, full confidence that the design aspects and the things that they would bring, not only with who we've got under contract for design in SCJ, and SCJ has won quite a few awards for roundabouts. They've got a specialist on board in their firm, so we're fairly confident that we've picked the right consultant to design this, along with input from, and they have no problem working with the WashDOT folks for input. So I think they understand as well as everybody that the more heads they've got to wrap around this, the better everybody's going to be. But
So you feel confident, fairly confident, the design comes out, or preliminary design come out, all our commercial traffic will be satisfied?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
It won't cure bad driving.
I know that.
Like, a center island will have a rolled edge that they can rub up
Yep.
over and not, so, you know what I
And
mean?
that's
Like,
what I was asking about earlier.
There's always an apron, and that is one thing that we got even out of the downtown connector project from Dennett and Brian, was the one thing that they really found, because early on, they were doing, as Joe stated, they were doing a stand-up curb, not only on the center, but also on the outer edge. They were having a ton of problems so to give the motoring public some place to err to, and give them that rolled edge if they need to go up on, it certainly has helped all of these projects. So learning those types of things, certainly them doing them is a whole lot better than us making those mistakes. But I think they have learned and continue to develop those. So all of those recommendations certainly we take and hear from them.
plowing around all these meetings is gonna be fun.
Yes. Luckily, global warming, we don't have a lot of snow around here anymore. Now I say that, and we'll get
Yeah,
yeah. No, we have had that, and it's a big concern on downtown connector right now with the Jersey barriers that are going up the hill. They are gonna push those back to the curb about 8 feet. The one concern that I had, and I told them we have to have some place to put the snow, because the one time we don't plan for it is the one time we get hit with it, so.
Rubber bits.
Yes. So phase 4, moving on, downtown, west downtown. This is a very large project that encompasses the safe routes to schools. So we have split it into phase 4A, B, and C. So the first phase of this, we do have a TID application in that we will hear here in just a few weeks on November 17th. We asked for about $800,000 for this initial project of phase A. So basically, I think ultimately it shows up to 8th Street, but I think we would extend it back to 7th Street. But from 7th Street out to the city limits, new paving, sidewalks on both sides of the road to 12th Street, and then a new sidewalk on Railroad from 12th out to the city limits, so out to Pacific Court.
On the south side of the.
On the south side of the road.
And is there an opportunity to work with your friends at Mason Transit to perhaps look at some sort of a bus stop across from Turning Point? Because right now that seems to be a big issue.
We have already started that conversation with them. They are
Fantastic.
great partners as far as
That's
looking at things like that. So they've actually already reached out to me, talking about YMCA.
Good.
Yeah, I just got an email from them today asking if they could be involved in the conversation of what that looks like and how they get a bus stop in there to help serve that. So, yeah, so they are great as far as working on that.
So A is on 800,000, and B?
Well, A is actually 1.3 million.
Okay.
Contribution from the city of about 500,000, and that really comes from a 10% match in the roadway fund, the roadway portion of it, the paving, and then the sidewalk fund isn't quite as great, and we had to put in quite a bit more into that, about 400,000 to complete that project, to include sidewalks, ADA ramps, some rapid flashers to cross Railroad Avenue, and some illumination at the intersections to get those, a lot of the school kids, because looking at this as a Safe Routes to School project, to get those kids from south of Railroad Avenue over to Evergreen School and Choice.
And where's the proposed pedestrian flashers?
They're proposed at this point at 8th and 12th. We figured that kids walking in from out at the Turning Point Pacific Court would come in on that south sidewalk, hit 12th, cross, and be able to hit another sidewalk on Franklin. And the kids coming from the south neighborhood down in the Coda Street area would be able to cross at 8th. Actually, I think it's 9th now that I say that, sorry. They're obviously with the intersection at 7th, I think it was 9th.
Okay.
And then phase B of this, so 7th Street, Alder to Coda. So basically, same type of project. It would be paving of that section along with sidewalks and ADA ramps. Sidewalks are in pretty decent shape, but ADA ramps are certainly out of compliance. So replacing all of those ADA ramps in that area. And then a major federal project to do the rest of that. You can see basically from Coda Street all the way to Alder, and from 7th up to 12th. So all new paving, sidewalks, and ADA ramps with some illumination. So a fairly large project, but that would be a federal project that we would put in Safe Routes to Schools ask in 2021. I do, and we'll get to that at the end of the slide.
Okay.
Is there any potential impact with the new Olympic title going in that area? Will it help offset any of those costs or take on a portion of that work perhaps?
It will. We've addressed that with them. Mark, Jason, and myself have been working with them because they do have frontage improvements. And with us vacating that north 20-foot section of Railroad Avenue, they are required to take out all of those trees and do the frontage improvements. We have told them that if we do get funding through TIV, that they would be able to put their portion into that project, probably save them some money, just economy of scale again, and put into that project and do it all at one time. So phase 5 of Access Shelton, again, going right in line with the roundabout at 13th and Wallace Nealon, extending off of that project. So this would be from that roundabout or that four-way stop now, out past Springfield Park, deteriorating pavement out there all the way to Island Lake Drive. It also would include a sidewalk. So if you haven't seen it, there's a short stub of the sidewalk on the, what would be the east side of 13th that extends for 80 feet, 80 to 100 feet. But really we would like to extend that all the way out to Springfield. We get a lot of pedestrians crossing, just running across the road at the entrance to Springfield. Give them a way to walk down a sidewalk, get to a either a signalized intersection or a roundabout, much safer to cross, and then on to the Rockdale walking path. And that was mostly grant funded. And then Access Shelton Phase 6, so out to the end of our planning cycle, extending onto the Downtown Connector Project and revamping the Olympic Highway North section from C to K Street. So we did have most recently a death up in that area of a pedestrian that got hit by a car. Illumination is not great up there. The distance between the sidewalks crossing Olympic Highway North is much too far. So looking at a concept to do some bulb outs at intersections, shorten that distance, give maybe a refuse island for pedestrians in the center so that they didn't have to cross that all at one time, and creating some on-street parking between the bulb outs. There is now, it would be somewhat limited for sight lines, and then new paving, new illumination in that area. But again, a fairly large project. And with these, what we tried to do was spread them out. Transportation Improvement Board has indicated to us that these major projects that we're putting in for, really your opportunity is about every other year. So to plan for putting in a major TIV ask every other year, and then a smaller paving project, much like what we've got on, that we asked for this year, in that $800,000 range along with sidewalks. So that was the concept of, and we'll get to the schedule here in just a sec. So looking at this is a little hard to read. I think the next, it's got a lot on it, but the next one I think will show, if nobody's opposed to me skipping forward, this one shows a much better view of kind of what we're doing. Started the planning in 2018, like we mentioned, for downtown phase 4A. We started 10% design approved by the council, and also for phase 3A and B, so that's the funding that you see there. And then moving into 2019, continuing on with the design, full design of that in 2019, and then you can see going to construction in 2020. So most likely spring of 2020, we would go to bid late in the winter of next year, 2019, into 2020 for those projects. And what it looks like right now is TID application for phase 3A, so the roundabout at 13th Street was the one after having the TID engineers out, indicated that that would be the one that would be most likely to be funded, just because the intersection at Wallace Nealon and Spring Road already has a signal, which has a tough time scoring if there's already some sort of traffic signal there or control. So looking at that, you can see out into 2020 an application for the rest of that project. So starting most likely with phase 3B and moving into 3A later in that year. And then really looking at the overall construction, actually design. Well, I don't know if anybody else's eyes are better than mine, but so access Shelton phase 4B, so another smaller paving project in 2020, and that is indicated by the small TIB ask in 2020. And then into 2021, that larger federal ask. So Kathy, you had asked what that total project to finish off for phase 4, and we have looked at about a $2 million project to finish that off for the rest of that project. And I think we've answered a few of these questions, but the questions that I did receive that I don't think we answered is, within this, the overall local funding for 2018, is it accurate and up to date? Terry did some work on it to get us numbers, and we are fairly accurate on revenue into these funds. So TDE funds to date are just over $1 million at 1.05 million, with one more quarter, 3 more months of collection of TDE, and we've been averaging right now about 45,000 a month. So adding that onto this, we get within a fraction of the 1.3 million that we're looking at for 2018 as a total. REAP funds, we have
Craig, for 18, are we anticipating any cost overruns, contract changes that would impact that on the current project?
We are not anticipating any cost overruns at this point. Downtown Connector has had some changes, and like I've indicated to the council, there is no minor change within that. So anything that we add to that project, it's something that we have to try and cut in a different area, and we have tried to do that throughout the project. So we're hoping that that comes in on budget. There may be some assistance also if there is a cost overrun. You do have an opportunity to go back to TID and ask for at least a portion of that cost overrun. That is why they don't allow for a minor change. So we don't anticipate it at this point, but certainly we have had a couple of significant changes. The storm pipe up Olympic Highway North in the amount of about 140,000, and some smaller changes that we've made that have been in the tens of thousands, but we don't anticipate it at this point any cost overruns. So, and then with Basin 3, obviously that's a sewer project, and any paving also that comes along with that is strictly sewer money.
All of those projects had built-in contingencies, right? You had built, or
Very-
except for your,
Down-
yeah.
downtown connector's got a very small contingency, 10%. Basin 3 had a much larger 10%, and a $250,000 minor change. So it had a much bigger contingency built into it.
And we have eaten into both contingencies a little bit. Or we haven't yet.
Not in Basin 3. Basin 3, I think we're well under budget with Basin 3. Downtown connector, we certainly, I think, have eaten into with some of those changes into that contingency fund. But we don't anticipate that being a significant, if any, cost overrun. So, but yeah, looking at that, and then looking at the refunds, we estimated it to be at the end of 2018, 275,000. Right now, we're just about at that with 3 months to go, 1 quarter to go in that. And so far, we've been averaging about 35,000 a month in refunds coming in. So I don't know if we anticipate that trend continuing going into winter, but obviously D.R. Horton continues to build houses, and I think we've got some others in town that continue to sell as well. So I think we would anticipate some decrease in that over the next quarter, but not much. But still, even to this date through October, so 2 months left, not quite a quarter, we are already at that number. And as far as TIF fees go, we are also, I believe, a little under what we had estimated to be 525. Right now, we're at 240,000 with the school TIF at 200,000 and the hospital at about 325. We're going to be almost $250,000 over what we anticipated that to be. So we have built in some, been fairly conservative in these numbers. And then moving forward, you can see without knowing where the housing market is going to go, 150,000 in REIT money we projected per year, with 450,000 in TBD and around 100,000 in TIF. So, but at any point, if the economy does turn, certainly those numbers could go either up or down.
And I'll just express it's not a concern, I know this is a plan about assuming we're gonna zero out TBD basically every year. And understanding the projects that we have to pay with living out of TBD, the residential streets and the maintenance, to make sure we don't short ourselves potentially on those things.
Absolutely, and we took that into consideration. We have drafted, Terry just saw this, and keep in mind, this is a draft. First stab at this, but we did create what we feel like would be a policy for the council to at least consider, that would leave at least around 400,000. The way that I wrote this was a contingent or a reserve fund in the amount equal to no less than the previous year's revenue for Transportation Benefit District funds. So with that being said, that has been ranging somewhere around that $400,000 mark up to around 500,000. So it really is in line with your general fund strategic reserve policy, and really that's what we mimic this after. But we certainly could adopt something of this sort to address emergency repairs and unforeseen maintenance that needs to happen.
Strategic reserve at a dollar amount or a percentage of revenue?
Again, first stab at this,
Yeah.
and just
I
wanted
didn't
to
think that's
really
what
spur
happened, Bob.
just everybody's
Yeah.
ideas here of how and what that policy would look like. Like I said, first stab at it, and what I came up with was just the previous year's TBD funds. I know in the general fund, the strategic reserve is a percentage of the total expenditures, 6.375, I think. That's difficult to do. That would be very difficult to do in this process, but yeah, percentage of total revenue. And we did not want to include TIF or REIT just because those are, there would be so many problems trying to reserve out TIF fees because there is a requirement to spend those within 10 years. REIT money would be difficult because it can be used for other things also, and really that's why we wanted to really just designate it to TBD funds being reserved out. So however the council would like to do that, we would love to have some input and some guidance on what that actually looks like. Terry's gonna check with Sandy to see if she's got any ideas and seen anything in other municipalities, the way they reserved out transportation funds, so certainly.
And I would think we could check with AWC too, they would probably have.
And
At least an idea of who might have something like
this
that.
is so new, Mike hasn't even seen this, so maybe you got some great ideas for us. But, yeah, really just wanted to take a shot in the dark at this, just really to spur on some conversation of what does the council want to see? And we certainly see a need to reserve some funds out. We have a major sinkhole, we have a slide on a hill where it washes the road out, where we needed some funding available to us that we weren't just then asking for general fund money to go and fix a roadway.
So we do have to realize this is the transmission benefit district was voted by the people to fix their roads. So we shouldn't be hoarding too much of this money. We should be using this money to fix their roads.
But that's really why we set a year, and if you kind of read through this, it does point out that it provides a means for any of those unforeseen problems, no longer than 1 year for emergency maintenance and roadway costs, and those would need to be reestablished within 1 year. So that is why we put that 1 year clause in there, because we certainly see that need, but.
And the other points you made too, along those lines, Eric, is that this ensures that there's money in that fund so that it's not spent down entirely on matching grant dollars or other major projects, which would take away the city's ability to service those residential paving services, which really was what it was kind of billed as.
Well, that
So we have
is made
continued
for
that
the
in, so if you
Right.
look at the bottom of this
Right.
funding, this concept, we certainly have addressed the maintenance issue, the lack of maintenance that we have had in the past, zero maintenance, other than some crack sealing. But again, that is very difficult. I talked to Mike about that today. He understands, I'm sure Joe understands the amount of manpower that it takes on a daily basis to go out and crack seal. You're talking about an activity that takes 10 to 12 employees, and with 3 in the street fund, if we go out and do that for a month, that eats up a large portion of those total activities that we can do. So it's been fairly limited, but this certainly addresses any chip seal or fog seal that we would do with the roadway maintenance activities at $200,000 a year, and then the residential blocks that are at actually increased in 2020 to $250,000 a year. But then you can see the very bottom of that slide, it shows the end fund balance per year. If we were to do every one of these projects with the anticipated grant funding that we would get, that we feel like we've been fairly conservative, then you can see how it goes. And it does start to dip down into that large federal project in 2021 to about $400,000 in fund balance at the end of 2021, and then basically maintaining right around that $400,000 to $500,000 range from into 2022 and into ultimately 2023. So we certainly have been at least sensitive to that and have tried to plan ahead for any of those unforeseen. Luckily, we haven't had any of those, but we certainly have had some scares. Highland Drive that looked like it had some issues as far as sliding goes, Angle Way, I mean, we have a lot of topography here, so any of those hillsides at any moment certainly could be a problem for us. So we certainly want to continue to plan for that.
I think this would be an excellent discussion point once we find out what other agencies do.
And at this proposed schedule, or this rate, how long would it take before every surface has been touched? Meaning residential, roadways, arterials, is this a 20-year cycle, is this a 5-year cycle? I mean,
50.
in
We're
reality.
at 50.
We designed to 50, and we planned,
Yeah.
theoretically planned for the materials and those things to withstand, but yeah, 25 years is kind of more realistic.
But to touch every one of these, with what the inventory that we've got out there, we've done a great job of, through a lot of our sewer basin projects, of getting a lot of that residential paving done. But I think you'll hear more about that once we get the road rating program completely packaged up and brought back to you, hopefully by the end of the year. And we'll be able to really show what our inventory is, how much is left out there, how much maintenance do we have to do on an annual basis.
And I suppose my purpose in asking that, and you hit on it right there, Craig, is it's wonderful to do these capital projects and have new surface.
Yep.
But if we don't spend the money to maintain what we have, we're gonna end up in a worse spot than we were.
And
I'm sincerely concerned about that.
Yeah, and typically with these roadways, they need a fog seal, chip seal after 7 years, depending on traffic, but you're looking somewhere in that 6 to 8 year range before you really need to do something with them. You really need to seal those cracks up so that moisture's not getting down into that subgrade. And frankly, to be completely honest with you, we have been terrible at that. We just have done absolutely nothing as far as that goes, but we want to address that and we want to do that.
I appreciate that.
And especially on these projects that are getting to that point, like Northcliffe, planning for Pioneer Way, some of those projects that we have done, plan for those and get those Wallace Nealon Boulevard. And it's not going to be a popular thing, but we go to chip seal Wallace Nealon Boulevard, you are going to hear about it.
Oh, yeah.
You are absolutely going to hear about it. But it is something that I think that and we certainly, before we do anything if it gets approved through the budget, because we do have a budget request in for maintenance this year or for 2019 of $200,000, but it's going to have to be a conversation that we have, that this council understands for a week, how many calls we're going to get, and then it's going to be great. But yeah, we have seen those out in the county. I'm sure, Deidre, I'm sure you're.
I have answered a few of those phone calls. Yeah.
So, yeah, but within the city and these roadways that are heavily used, much different than doing it out in the county, but I think it's something as painful. I'll get them anyway, I guarantee it, so. But it's something certainly I think that the council needs to certainly approve, that we understand what that risk is and politically what that means, and really be proactive in getting out through Andy and communications of the benefits of doing this and trying to get ahead of it.
And avoid getting it all over your car,
Yes. So,
literally.
Yeah, to be able to prolong the life of the pavement another 10 years
absolutely.
for $50,000.
Yeah.
Pavement is the most expensive piece of infrastructure technically that the city owns. How much concrete, rigid pavement do we still have, and is there kind of a plan to factor some of that into this? Because I know what's in Coda Street, mostly all concrete still.
Most of downtown.
Most of downtown, yeah.
Most of downtown.
Is there a lot of it still that's been overlaid with asphalt? I know that's what going up the hill on Womack Highway was, concrete with an asphalt overlay, which
There's a mix, there's a pretty good mix, but there's a lot of just straight concrete roadways downtown. And those are very expensive. And they're old.
And Fourth, for example, is
Yeah.
a pretty tough.
It's an expensive
Yeah.
job, getting that normalized
Yeah. And when you're talking
and
about
impactful.
that old of concrete that's
Yeah.
a foot or more thick, with the aggregate that they used to use 70 years ago, it's is going to be very, very difficult. So, but we are looking at that. We've got a request in to do some, at least some investigational work and some, I guess, really a test, some concrete panel lifting with like slab jack coming in and actually doing some of that, and seeing how that works for us. We do have a budget request in for that for this year, very small amount to do some of the, like First and Coda. Some of those roadways down around Dairy Queen that are failing and sinking, but see investigation on how that works for us.
Was it cement because of the water table? Is that what they use cement?
Basically floating on mud. That's the
That's
problem.
why- that's
That's
why
why
it
we
was
can't
cement.
just go in and tear it out and put asphalt down. It would just, the subgrade just doesn't allow it.
So you keep the cement and just pile on top of it?
Well, you'd either keep it or you'd rubbleize it.
Styrofoam,
I saw
See
that
that?
on a video.
it'll float and it lasts forever.
Yeah, that's the problem. Lasts forever.
But, see it all over the place now,
Yeah, so,
under the roadways.
Yes.
a lot of different options out there,
Styrofoam.
but, yeah. So certainly something we can look at.
Okay.
My point in all of that is I would want, that at least for me, and I can't speak for council, but I would really encourage us to be looking at those numbers pretty critically, especially with maintenance activities, because I can't imagine it's going to get any less expensive, and that flat 200K, I don't know if that's enough to do us justice. And you all are the experts in that area, so I will bounce that back to your report, but I think even looking at a slight increase year over year or something to address, you've heard me say it before, I'd love to put an addition on my house, I'm not gonna do it till siding's done, right? Like, you have to take care of what you
Yeah.
have before we start looking at additional infrastructure, so,
Absolutely.
making sure that you feel confident that there's adequate funding to maintain what we have as we're also looking at new projects.
And I think we'll get a better sense of that, especially over the next year or two. We get into this activity, we get back and talk to the county and see what those costs are with them to do chip seal for us. We used to partner with them, seeing what that cost is as opposed to going with a contractor like Doolittle Construction who does chip seal, and see exactly how much we can get done. And really what needs to be chip sealed, what needs to be fog sealed. A couple different applications, much different pricing. So looking at some of those roadways, maybe like Northcliffe, that doesn't necessarily need a chip seal, but can get by with a fog seal. And we'll get more in depth into that, I think, once we get a road rating program in place and actually see what those results are, and see what those roadways look like.
Yeah, I think the road rating piece is gonna be really big for us to look at, and something like at the DOT that we implemented 5 or 6 years ago is a maintenance one-touch policy before any sort of capital improvement. So we evaluate the roadways and we inspected pavement, and we determined critical where we need to do the work, and have we done any maintenance? Have we done any a chip seal, a dig out, and certain strategic pavement maintenance things, and if we haven't, then that capital ask, we're not gonna necessarily get it, so we need to at least put forth some sort of an effort to focus that based on the needs strategically, so I think that's a good.
And then the other thing, just to keep in mind, because it really, I had a very tough time with it when we had the TIB engineers out. One other thing just to consider, we understand the need to preserve some of these newer projects, but there are other projects that if you could go and do a dig out, it would certainly prolong the life of the road. A great example is out, the project that we're proposing out 13th Street out to Island Lake Drive. That roadway has some spots where we can go lane grind some of those wheel path areas, patch them back. Unfortunately, once you do that maintenance, you have no chance with TIB for funding. Anytime you improve that roadway, you have no chance for funding. So that is something else to consider when we're looking at these. Some of those roadways that are on that tipping point of really failing, which that one is, it's got a lot of failure in it, it's got a lot of cracking, wheel lanes are sinking. We have done some maintenance and got scolded for it. Those roots that were popping out of the pavement up there, we went out, not that they're much better now, But we cut those roots out and grinded those and patched some of those. Frankly, the TIB engineers, when they came out, said that might be the one thing that stops you from getting funding over the next year or two. So, with those, keeping those things in mind, understand that sometimes when maybe you see a lack of maintenance, it's strategic. So, not that we want to take that route, but there are some of these, Railroad Avenue. If we were to fix that section between 8th and 9th, probably no chance that gets funded. We continue to patch it back, but if we were to do a grind in that area, because that's really the worst part of that, you probably have no chance for funding through TIB. So it's something to keep in mind. Not that that's the way we want to
Totally
do
get
business.
it, and at the same time, TIB isn't gonna keep the city's roadway infrastructure for its entirety.
That's true.
Operating, and,
Yeah.
it's great kickstart, it's a great way to save and cut costs, but moving forward, looking at things in a more economical and strategic fashion is gonna prevent us from having to rely on grants all the time for everything to bail us out of every issue, so, yes. The other thing that came up with the strategic reserve in my mind, question was, anytime you talk about the words like emergency type issues that come up, if we had a slide, a road failure scenario, do we have good ties with like the county and the emergency management division to recuperate costs related to emergency response for at least our on-system roads, so the major arch minor, anything, the functional classification system. So yeah, if we do have one of those really big sites, that's, I think it's like a $700,000 threshold that we can go for like emergency relief funding to pay for that. Have we been through that at all in the city in its history, or none of it?
We have, and any time that we have a major event and we have a failure, we track time no matter what.
Yeah.
We start to track time.
Labor, equipment, material,
Yeah,
everything.
absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
You need that initial capital to
Yeah.
fix the problem, but then getting the reimbursement, so we have had good ties there. with
And Joe, maybe you
vets
can
and-
explain that, I guess, to the rest of the council, if they don't understand that, but how that funding comes after the actual event.
Yeah, so like, speaking like from the state level, if we have a major emergency where we lose the road for any reason, a drainage failure, whatever, bad storm, once that hits like about $750,000 for that particular site, it's eligible for emergency relief funding through the FHWA's, Federal Highways Administration's Emergency Relief Program. The way they kind of do that though is everything's done at the county level, so I wasn't sure at the municipality level how that kind of rolls up or down or whatever. But anyway, we have to kind of report that out. We work with an area engineer, the engineer comes out, we work on the site, and basically they pay the bill. The statute of limitations is really wide as well, so ultimately, you know, it could be months down the road, you get some funding back. But like any Fed type project, there's lots and lots of things to track, and there's also little nuances there where they want to make sure that you have training and forms that are appropriate for documentation purposes. And I guess my only point was, are we already kind of set up to receive that funding if things arise? Have we gone through that exercise at least once before in the past? Because like I said, I know like the DOT, there's like a declaration of emergency process.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, the governor proclaims, but like at the local level, would that be something like the mayor would have to declare an emergency, and then that gets funneled up to the county, and then county to.
Everything we've ever dealt with has gone through the governor. Anytime the governor
Okay.
declares a state of emergency and we have a failure, we start tracking.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, cool. But never something, I don't know, maybe the former mayor could tell us, but I've never seen the mayor declare something.
Wanted to,
Wanted to?
I wanted to do it, but I never did.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So any additional questions as far as Access Shelton, and I guess just, again, next steps of what you would like to see, you know, moving forward, and how we plan for these things, as far as obviously starting now, into design phases and ultimately moving forward with some of these projects.
I think it's just nice to see it show. That's been new, I think, it's so much 5 years out, major projects, and the funding, at least the estimated funding,
Yes.
that's very beneficial, I think.
And to piggyback from that, I would hope that this is going to continue to be a living document. And that on
Absolutely.
at least an annual basis,
Yep.
we're reevaluating, are the trends following? And are we poised to continue in this fashion, or do we need to make some reevaluations along the way?
And to answer your question, absolutely, and this has been, since we actually started Downtown Connector, that is really what spawned this Access Shelton, and it has just continued to grow and develop. So we certainly want to look at this on an annual basis and make sure we're updating and keeping up with that. Because obviously with cost increases and all of a sudden we don't do a project and it gets kicked to the next year, obviously that kicks everything down the road, or there are certain times we're gonna have to just adjust and, you know, something becomes more of a priority, but we certainly wanna continue to do that.
And I would just say, I hope we continue to bring this body so that we are not only aware of the financial implications, but also so that we can support you in your efforts to continue on these projects. I know how much you all have on your plate, so it's really, I appreciate us being able to see it in this fashion. I think that the format works really well, and it is a good forum for us to have this conversation, so
Good.
I appreciate that.
And
Yeah.
maybe at a minimum, put it in the schedule once a year, at a minimum, to go
Yeah.
through this, and what best time, maybe prior to budget, or might be a good time.
It would probably be around the time when we really would have a budget retreat in the spring, because really trying to prepare for those grant funding cycles, and a lot of these projects come from that. So being able to, I guess, develop those projects and look ahead into late summer would be critical. So,
That sounds good.
yeah.
Okay, thanks,
So,
Frank.
next steps. Do you want to see something formally come forward so that we accept the concept of downtown, or the Access Shelton? Or are you okay with this being, I guess, maybe just concurring that this is a plan moving forward, and something that we can update in the future?
I'm good, just,
Plan that we can update.
yeah,
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 carrying on, I don't think
keep
we
the
have
conversation
formally-
going on.
yeah.
Okay.
Unless Mike or Craig have a different view.
No, I think you could go either way with it, actually. I mean, you could formalize it and adopt it via a resolution, or, you know, just a council motion, that you accept the Access Shelton forward-looking plan. As a motion, that would have to be done at a business meeting, a regular meeting. Or you could just do what you've done here tonight, and just by consensus, say, you know, this is a great document, we want it to be living, we want it to come up in the spring with a budget retreat, which I totally agree with Craig. That's really also the time to relook at not just this, but a variety of other planning documents that the city has on the table.
Are there any implications as far as seeking grant funding or any legislative ask that it would bolster the ask to have a formally adopted plan by city council versus an internal document? That would be my only question, I suppose.
Grant funding, probably not. Legislative?
Potentially legislative.
Probably.
Okay, then that, let's go the other route then.
Yeah.
So maybe put it on the schedule for.
November
November
6th.
Or,
6th.
yeah,
Okay.
put it on the next.
We talked about it.
Formally adopt the Access Shelton.
And do we want to go a step further and have any formal policy about reviewing it on an annual basis? Or is that something we'll just allow councils and staff to decide as it comes up?
It sounds like we decided to be reviewed at the timing of the budget retreat.
Yeah.
That seems appropriate.
We can certainly write that in.
Yeah. yeah.
And then, would you like to see this draft document of a strategic reserve also brought forward either at that time or sometime in the near future?
That's only a week, everybody.
I would
Yeah.
prefer
I
to
think
have
That's
more
why
time.
I'm asking,
Yeah.
is that if we
I don't think there's a
delay.
rush on it, let's,
No.
I don't think
Okay.
the two are inexplicably tied.
yeah, let's push it out there a few weeks.
I'd rather we do some due diligence
on to the last one, street vacations.
Mayor,
Yes,
before we get started, do you want a motion to extend the meeting? This is like a
we have
long-
14 minutes.
14 minutes, what do you think, Craig? We need to extend the meeting?
I'm guessing most likely.
I think so.
Oh, no.
Half hour, an hour?
No, not an hour.
It really
I'm
depends on how
asking
many
Craig.
questions this council has on street and alley vacations.
Well, we go an hour, and then we can always adjourn.
I move we extend the meeting another hour.
Okay.
Second?
All in favor of extending the meeting?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we'll extend the meeting. Sorry, Gary.
It's all right, no square dancing if you need.
This looks like it might be a conversation, so.
So, I think you all have had time to review what we put together, and I guess without further explanation from me, I can give you some background of where we came up with this and what went into this process of developing this. We looked at 3 really good vacation policies: Bainbridge Island, Gig Harbor, and I just lost the last one. Yes, so, it was not Seattle. But yeah, we looked at 3 of them and really tried to mold all 3 of them into what we thought was the best living document. A lot of input from, and I will pass this out since I failed to include it into the packet. This is a list of the appraisers in Washington, and you will see that with that, quite a few of them, we wrote into this that the stipulation would be the appraiser is either MAI certified or SRA certified, which Mike and I were talking earlier, and really what this is this is the, I apologize, there are quite a few of them. But really, these certifications are the PhD of appraisers. So these appraisers are the ones that have been, have taken additional training and have been certified by the, Mike, help me out, the Master
Appraisal Institute.
Yes,
The
thank you.
MIA. I'm not sure what the other one stands for, but I've used MAIs before.
Yes, so we did restrict it to those individuals. You will see, looking down through here, there are a few of them locally. We have reached out to some of the local ones in Olympia, Centralia, just to get some feedback from them, and we have had some great feedback from them. So just answering some of those questions, I can tell you one of the ones that came up was, how do we get through this standalone lot? Is it a building lot? Do you appraise it as a building lot? Do you appraise it as it's going to be split up by the abutting property owners? And the good thing with these certified appraisers, the answer was, we absolutely split them up and appraise them as they are lands that are going to the adjacent property owners. And one thing that we did find was with that, most of them, it's very difficult for them to come up with comparables. So what they have done through the years is they have created these comparables through the actual vacation process. So they keep a list. The gentleman that we spoke with in Olympia, he's been doing it for 30 years. He has kept a comparable list of street vacations and values that he actually cross-references when he doesn't have comparables back to previous vacations that he has done and others have done. Same thing we found in the husband and wife group out of Centralia, same process. The husband in the group was a right-of-way and vacation specialist. That was what he does. That's the only thing he does. Same kind of concept is he uses prior vacations to compare against.
How does that take into account changes in market value and inflation and everything else? Do they have some, formula they plug it through?
They do. And really, it's this moving target that I think they're always trying to adjust to. And all of them did indicate that it is difficult.
And that is why we wrote in, and the other three that we compared against, have that provision in there that we provide a list of appraisers, and they pick one of the three. And then if we are not satisfied, we did indicate that it's the Public Works Director that makes the decision whether we're satisfied with the appraisal. If not, we can go back out at the city's expense to get an additional appraisal. So you really have two avenues there to, what we would feel, get a good appraisal. But certainly with these certified appraisers, I don't see an issue with getting a good one with the first try.
Craig, and the way it's written, the city can pick anyone from this list.
Correct.
Correct.
We would like to say there is no requirement for this service through, ultimately it's paid for by the applicant. So it wouldn't necessarily fall on us, but even if we were paying for it, there is no requirement through appraisal services for us to either rotate or go to bid to use these. So through bid law.
And we wouldn't have to use one on the original list of three.
Correct. We could change that. And
As long as they're qualified, we could pick that appraiser.
Correct. And I think what we would do initially is stick to the local area of Olympia, Port Orchard, that area, and then maybe down I-5 into, Centralia, Chehalis area, and try and keep it local. But ultimately, that would be our goal.
That's been my concern all along, is the application of the full lot just didn't seem appropriate.
Yes, absolutely. And there is no place for the applicant to indicate that that's the way they want it done. It's really up to the appraiser. But all of the experienced appraisers that were certified that we talked to, every one of them said, if we were to get a call, I just posed the scenario to them. I call you and say, I'm trying to go through a street vacation with the city of Shelton. Can you appraise a lot for me? How do you do that? And they all indicated that it was not a standalone lot. We would appraise it as if it were broken up to the abutting property owners. So I don't think that's an issue. But you will see, we did look at the application fee since we are requiring the applicant to pay for the appraisal. We have proposed to go back and change the fee schedule and lower that fee from $2,000 down to $500, which we had looked at and really to cover staff time, this council's time, and all the processing of that to be $500. And we would propose to go back and change the fee schedule. But within this ordinance, you will see that we haven't tied the cost to this ordinance. It is it ties back to the fee schedule. So we could change the fee schedule without coming back and changing this ordinance.
And does the 500 cover, on average, the internal costs of the vacation?
That's what we feel would cover the cost. If we don't have to go through the appraisal process and finding an appraiser, getting bids on that, and finding a qualified appraiser, and we're just processing the application, we feel that $500 number would be sufficient. They would have to find an appraiser, they would have to get the property surveyed and platted, and then we would process after that.
But we would provide them with referrals for.
We would provide them with the state certified list of three certified appraisers.
And the surveying is commonly required?
That's what we found through the other policies that we looked at.
That'd be a huge cost, too. Could be.
It certainly could be, yeah. Most of our areas, though, we do have monuments in the street. They are fairly easily, especially at intersecting streets, which all of these, if they're platted, alleys would be a little more difficult, but certainly there should be enough monuments out there that a street would be not too difficult. Alley, maybe a little bit of a different story, so depending on where it was at. So I have a question.
I have some confusion of right of way, property, and alley. You kind of bring me up to speed on. So when we vacated the alley towards Kitty Hill, did we also at that
That
time?
wasn't an alley, that was a roadway.
The road.
That was a 60-foot right-of-way, street path, 4th Street.
Do we, okay,
Most alleys are 20 feet, 20-foot right-of-ways.
okay.
Some up in the Hillcrest area are 10.
Sorry, my confusion lies in what's the difference between, there's a difference between right-of-way and property. Did we vacate the property and the right-of-way? Because do we have easement rights to that property still?
All of those stay in place. Any easements, utility easements, or access easements stay in place, much like the hospital.
So, because that was originally plotted as a street,
Correct.
right? So the city still has easement rights to what we just vacated, correct? So we didn't vacate the right-of-way. And we didn't
I don't
vacate.
think so.
We
That was kind of my
vacated
question
the
on
property.
fee versus easement.
So access to that right-of-way, the guy across the street can drive through that property?
And in his voice.
No.
No.
It becomes,
Obviously, he's not gonna drive through.
it
but
becomes
the other side-
attached,
So,
it becomes attached to the adjacent parcel. So no, it is no longer,
so they,
It is no longer a
parcel
city
owners
right.
own up to the center. There's
Correct.
no city property in between, but the ground underneath the lines, there are, so my confusion there is,
The easement.
what are we vacating when we vacate? Are we-
So, an easement doesn't imply ownership.
Right.
If the city has an easement for utility access, there may be an easement for ingress and egress. We don't own anything. All we have is the right to use that property.
We and who else?
Only the ones that hold the easement have the right to use the property for the purposes in which the easement
All right,
is
here you are.
specified.
at the time of the vacation.
Exactly.
The deed easement.
Yeah.
So that
Yes.
means deed.
Right.
But there's not always an easement with every
Exactly.
vacation. We might not have utilities in place, we might not see the need to have utilities in those places, so that vacation is fee simple, exactly. It's
Much like 4th and Kenny. Unlike the hospital Govee, Mountain View Drive, where we had multiple utility easements within that.
But Joe, this is my question to you, Craig, there are some places in the city where the underlying fee is not the city's, and there's a public street over it with an easement. And that was my question, this vacation policy would cover.
That's where I'm.
I'm
I'm
assuming the city has an easement, there's a public street across private property.
So, because there's vacation of rights of way, which is different than vacation of streets and alleys, right? I'm correct in that thinking?
No, I think this policy covers.
So
both.
interchangeable, we're using those terms interchangeably? So
I agree with Mike, yes.
So
Absolutely.
street equals, city street equals city right of way,
Exactly.
city alley equals city right of way.
I mean, the actual physical street may be something less than the actual right-of-way. I mean, you could have a 60-foot right-of-way and a 40-foot street, for example.
Which we do a lot,
Yeah.
most of the
But
time.
you still have that right-of-way. So it would be basically one in this definition, it would be one and the same. If you vacate the right-of-way, you're vacating, in this example, 60 feet. You're not just vacating the 40-foot section of the street. Does that make sense? Yeah. No.
No, it doesn't.
This is what I struggle with, is using the terms interchangeably, because I don't, my initial interpretation or understanding of rights of way versus property is that they're not interchangeable.
The rights of way
There's
are.
a difference, there's a
Yeah.
difference there, and when I read vacation of streets and alleys, that doesn't mean vacation of our right of way. We're not
The
necessarily
the
giving up.
streets and alleys though lie within,
Sorry, sorry if I'm all over the place,
Yeah.
it's just,
I don't think you're alone.
I'm a little confused by that. And
I mean,
maybe we
actually-
could clarify
within the document, or?
I think it would be a good question to legal, actually, to see what they would recommend in terms of the more accurate definition or the accurate description of what we're trying to get done.
Yeah.
I think from what I sense is you're all on the same page in terms of what the intent of this ordinance will be, is to have a consistent way
Yes.
to vacate
Very
right
clear.
away, or streets and alleys. All of the above.
Right,
Thanks a lot.
and whether it's.
Hey, I'm sorry.
And whether it's an easement, the city owns the easement, or the city owns the property fee, this policy applies. The city's vacating their right on that property either through an easement or
The
the
easement's a
ownership.
completely different issue.
Yeah.
The easement's completely different.
Well, they have, it's assumed that they have a, yeah, technically they don't have an easement because they don't own the fee. They own the fee, so there is no
Right.
easement.
You know, I don't know.
But there are some-
Can we defer to legal and just maybe
But,
get it, like, that's a good
I
point.
guess, does it
I don't
apply
wanna-
if the city has an easement on my property for a city street? I don't think there's many in town, but I think there are some. And they vacate that easement, does this policy apply? And I petition to vacate, that street is no longer needed, or it's never been built. And I petition to vacate that right of way, which is, in this case, an easement.
Are you aware of any streets that are formally easements rather than right of way?
Find the one I was looking at.
Not off the top of my head.
Yeah. I think that would be an interesting research project to find out if there is one, because that would be very unusual. Very unusual.
And we can always say no. The phone rings, hey, I wanna vacate this land, you can just say no. They don't even have to fill an application, right?
My point is, right,
I can't say no.
we can vote on
They-
this.
they-
But we don't make them pay a fee if we're gonna say no, correct?
Like if we know there's plans.
Mark and I actually just talked about this, and we were talking about this at 5:30 tonight. Somewhat debating on that exact thing. And are there circumstances where we just wouldn't consider a vacation?
Exactly.
And Mark brought up landlocking a piece of land. We have an easement into a property, and by vacating it, giving it to the abutting property owners, we would landlock a piece of property. I certainly think we would let the
You just
applicant,
complicated the question.
we would certainly let the applicant know this is not likely to move forward. But I can't tell them, don't pay the fee and put in an application until the council makes the decision, because ultimately I can't make that decision. That is up to this council. So if they're advised, most likely this isn't going to go through, and they want to pay their $500, come to the council and plead their case, they certainly can do that. But are there circumstances that we would like to include that would just completely exclude any possibility of a vacation? I don't know what those would be, except for maybe landlocking a parcel.
The owners of an interest in any real property abutting upon any street or alley who may desire to vacate the street or alley or any part thereof may petition the city council.
Yes.
So but I just wanna make sure that
And
we're
there's
not
a
making them fill out
$500 fee
this.
to do that.
I just wanna make sure we're not
Petition
making
the
them
city
fill out this
council.
application for $500, getting an appraisal, and then us saying no.
They don't have to get the appraisal before they petition the council. They have to put the application, they do have to pay the fee.
So I guess maybe what you're trying to get at, Eric, is, are there certain properties, certain rights of way that we have future plans for, or is there some, list, process person to me, we know that these are properties that if they were vacated, so-and-so would end up landlocked. If anybody comes in on this list, we're not gonna make them pay the fee, we already know council's not gonna approve this.
Well,
That's what I
you
guess
don't
I'm
know
getting
that.
to.
I mean, I hear what Craig's saying is there's 99% chance they won't approve it,
But what I'm saying is, what I guess I'm asking Eric for clarification, are you asking, is that something that we as a council should approve as a list of properties that will not be considered? I mean, it's not that it could never be turned around again, but trying to keep.
No, it's
Exactly,
non-refundable.
non-refundable.
well, then.
So you have an
They have the same amount of
individual who
work.
comes in and finds
Yeah,
out
that's
that
exactly
they
right.
could never do
Whether
it
it's
in
approved
their
or
property.
not, they have the same amount of work.
But again, though, you look at just what we did with Govee and Mountain View Drive. If any street you were to look at with the amount of utility easements and other things that are within that roadway, I mean, I think that would be a prime candidate to say we wouldn't want to vacate that unless somebody's just going to put a parking lot pavement over the top of it that we can cut into, get to our utility, and that's all it was going to be used for. But if we exclude that and say that's not even a possibility, the hospital would never have the right to come to this council and say, we want to vacate Mountain View Drive and Govee to improve our project.
So if there's two property owners, and we
Really
vacated,
confused this, aren't you?
and we vacated that street, that property, is there an equal share now?
They both get to the center line of the right of way.
And that's required, isn't it?
That is required.
Yeah.
That is required by RCW.
Yes.
Right, they can choose then after the fact to transfer property between themselves. But
They could-
RCW is who dictates that, correct?
My
Bob?
understanding,
My
yeah.
understanding
They could
that?
certainly do a BLA,
Yeah.
a boundary line adjustment, and
But
move that
initially,
property.
it's required to come and be split equally, correct?
It's to the center.
Yeah.
Why can't we have them fill out this application that comes to the council? You give us your opinion, we say, yeah, that sounds good, and then they pay the $500 fee.
Well,
It's
it's still,
$500, they keep
if
saying,
you wanna-
no.
if you want to waive that fee, it is still taking myself, the customer service staff, it is, we have to process this, we have to get it on the
Like Donna said, same amount
agenda,
of
it's
time.
taking Donna time.
Well, and it forces a landowner to really think about it versus just shipping
Yeah.
it in with no.
We would get
cost.
frivolous requests for every sliver of property.
I've got an example for that. On Harvard, where Catalyst Park is, the Harvard dead ends basically at 8th, I believe, and it goes on through, and there's a property owner owns two parcels, they're stacked. And he asked to vacate that, so half of Harvard between 8th and 10th, I believe, Craig, or the 9th? Basically, yeah, from 8th to 10th through a swamp, won't typically be developed, but he owns two parcels stacked. So if we vacated that, his back parcel would not have access to be a right landlocked. It would be landlocked. We asked him to combine those parcels or provide an easement through that vacated right-of-way to the back parcel in case he sold that someday.
Right.
That property owner isn't landlocked and they get a fair deal. He didn't want to move forward with it.
Yeah.
We still spent that time to go through this process.
And to be completely honest with you, to exclude any property, because literally something like that, there could be a solution to really remedy just about any problem. Landlocking, you can do it through an easement. I mean, they're
Parcel
really.
combination, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, there really could be, depending on how badly they wanted it, there could be a solution to it.
Can I make this suggestion? This is really fairly simple. All you have to understand is anybody that wants to vacate some property has to understand there is a risk of the city vacating it or not vacating it. The $500, that's the risk. And I'm sorry, if you tell them, this is this, do not know if they will or they won't, these are the obstacles, you want to pay your $500. They pay the $500, that's it, you do the work. I mean, I don't have a big problem with, if you told them.
Isn't this fairly common?
I mean, I would just say, you get, that's the fee, and that's the risk, and just what it is.
$500.
So,
What's
That's how
fairly
simple it is.
common, Kevin?
$500 is fairly common. I mean,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so-
Yeah.
When you add the other fees on after the fact.
Yes,
Yeah.
because there are agencies that combine all of it together, much like we did with the $2,000 fee. But really, what we really wanted to do was, with those costs of appraisals fluctuating and depending on who the applicant actually picks, and the ease of us not having to go out and try to solicit an appraiser ourselves, we wanted to eliminate that out. But that's really what we were doing with our $2,000 fee, was taking on all of those costs.
And this-
I'm with Councilman Crawford.
And, well, the deal is, it's that simple, you just don't guarantee anything. When they come in, if you come in and
We
say,
never do.
there's a good chance, or you say, listen, you can do this, but you know, this is non-refundable, and just telling you, it looks like you got, the deck is stacked against you, or however you wanna frame it, but they pay the $500, you know, I mean, that's called site plan review. I wanna do a project.
Yeah.
I come in, I pay my $250 or whatever it is, used to be $20, but, you know.
I can tell you,
But
Mark,
you just
myself,
say
we're
goodbye.
always available to go to the front counter, and if somebody were to come in with an application and say, I would really like to run this by a staff member,
No.
any of us would go up and say, yes, this looks like a viable option. It very likely could get approved, but yeah, we're gonna certainly tell the applicant,
No guarantee.
this looks like a very difficult vacation.
Yes.
I don't know if I would spend your money on this, but I'm not going to tell them.
Non-refundable.
Ultimately, that's this council's
It's very
decision.
And I would coach you never to say likely, I would say,
It's a possibility.
this has some issues, you might
Yes.
rethink it.
But we certainly will try and help the public as much as we can.
See how simple that was?
So
My,
think it's,
Wow.
we
so,
did it.
because-
We did it.
Gary's just told me how
We
you stand by.
succeeded in that mission. We got it.
so
All right, I think it should be clear though on here that this vacation right-of-way application where it shows your non-refundable fee that, you know, this fee is non-refundable, and this probably may not be vacated or, you know.
May or may not be there.
You know, clearly this is at your risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, that seems fair.
Yep.
Yeah, but it doesn't say that this fee is not non-refundable. It doesn't say that if all terms were met or if we decide not to vacate it to them, it's not refundable. This fee, it needs to be clear. We just had this with the other people. He said, she said, what said, who said. It
That's
needs,
exactly what this is.
Yeah.
That says
This
fee,
is-
a non-refundable
Yeah.
application fee of
okay,
$500.
it doesn't say we're not gonna vacate that land to you though. We may not vacate that land. That fee is non-refundable, we may not vacate that land.
I think if you keep, Councilmember, I think if you keep reading, I think.
Going back and forth.
I thought it was simple. I thought I had this all fixed out.
You did,
Well, here, the city decides.
Petition, I think it's the first,
Mhm.
it's a petition for vacation.
Right.
A petition a petition is going to require the majority vote in order for
Well,
a
in here,
petition to be
it
So
says
it's-
forward.
if the city council decides to approve vacation.
It's covered under 12.18.014. Council decision.
Well, there's a couple
Page
different,
two.
there's a couple different places.
Well,
it's
I-
listed.
1218-014.
But it's good. It's exciting to see what's involved.
Craig,
If only we had this.
it's in the final paragraph right before they sign,
On the application.
and the only thing I might do is bold that or somehow highlight it, so.
Come on, we gotta, a reasonable person is gonna come here and not expect to pay $500 to get any piece of city property that they want,
Well, and that's-
okay? Come on,
but
so let's
more
just,
than
the
that.
Doesn't mean they're gonna
paperwork
read
is
this,
there.
though.
What's that?
Doesn't mean they're gonna read the application.
Understand.
Well,
But if the paper is
Well, I
there,
appreciate that it's in the application, and not just
Absolutely.
buried in the.
Yeah, it's right before you sign,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, it's not buried in the ordinance or the policy, it's actually listed on the application.
it's not non-existent. The documentation's right there.
It's right in that final sentence.
Yeah, we're good. Still confused on what right away and.
We're gonna get you an answer on that.
Just FYI.
Councilmember, we will contact John Collins,
Let's make sure.
And we will
Have
give
to
you.
call me directly.
We-
so
I-
I have it right.
I could call you directly.
I'm not gonna write it.
So, we will get you. He is not
Hey,
cheap.
the mayor wants to say something here.
So, I think we want to move this forward to an action item, and I guess we may have further discussion about wordsmithing if a council member wants to put that forward as far as the application.
Mike, just point of clarification. Is John Collins or Kathleen Haggard going to be at the November 6th meeting?
I don't know the answer to that.
So we'll certainly check on that. If
For
not,
the next meeting.
we'll certainly reach out to them, but maybe if they are going to be there and attend, it might be the time to get their legal opinion on what a right-of-way in a street.
But too, I
are.
don't know that they need to actually be physically,
All
or
right.
maybe we can just get an answer.
Yeah, but if they're going to be there, certainly coming from.
Councilmember Dorsey?
I would like to say, thanks to the staff for getting this done so quick.
Yes. I thought this would take a lot longer than this, and
Well,
I'm pretty surprised.
I will tell you, Councilmember Dorsey, that Brooke Kiltz did an amazing amount of work on this and did a great job. I can't take credit for this. She
You
did
can't?
a fantastic job putting this
I'll
together.
tell her
So,
tomorrow.
Yes, she.
Or you can tell her tomorrow.
See, we would have only had to table our decision for less than a month. That's all I'm saying.
Is it a
In the
possibility,
hopper,
It didn't
ready to
apply.
go.
is it a possibility when someone comes in
didn't apply.
and says application, that you let them know verbally that it's a non-refundable $500? Because people are they're gonna go, oh, I didn't see that in there.
Well, I can't tell you that I'm going to be
Or
there
somebody-
or the customer service staff. They are very busy, and with somebody
Right.
coming in, dropping off an application, paying their fee, it's going to be,
Remember,
I can't say that they would never forget to do that.
Craig, these are
but-
available on the city's website as well,
Yeah,
so.
Yeah,
can't
so
control that,
I
can
wouldn't, I wouldn't,
Or will be.
It's just, there's only so much hand holding that we need to be
Yes.
doing here, guys.
Well, and
Like-
always-
I know.
and
I'm
we'll-
sorry, like,
Well, no, and
I'm-
we'll certainly agree with Kathy that we should always try to be clear with folks when
We
we're
try.
speaking with them. I think it is clearly documented here and that there's an amount of reasonable, common sense approach that we have to apply to this.
Right.
absolutely.
I said it was simple, and I, it's simple.
Eric, are you good with this
All I'm good with
discussion?
is,
Okay.
moving it forward, I just don't think it's clear. It says non-refundable in 40 spots, but it doesn't say, you know, we may not do this.
Okay.
Does
I read it
that
as
make
it does,
sense?
but
I
okay.
mean, I know,
No.
you're gonna hold the big hand, but we just went through this. The people come in here and all upset, emailing all of us, calling us on the phone and telling us,
I don't know what to tell you,
this wasn't clear.
so.
I think fees by and of their nature are non-refundable unless said otherwise.
I don't think the fee was the issue, so the non-refundable fee was not the issue.
It's a year.
And this will help speed up that process
Or it's
and
clarify.
not be a year-long
Right.
and look
Okay.
at litigation
It's in the
problems.
application.
So we're done with this?
So just to clarify,
Yes, sir.
it's gonna go, your preference would be to have it on the action agenda for next Tuesday. And in between now and then, we'll have legal take a look at this and help us to decide the proper wording, whether it's a vacation of right-of-way or streets and alleys.
And I'll find that one straight.
Yeah.
I guess I'm fine with, it'd be nice to get it done, but if that's causing grief or the, Kathleen is not gonna be here, or John's not gonna be here, I think we're good delaying it 2 weeks.
I think we're all, are you okay with that, Craig?
I am. We're prepped and ready to
Yeah.
go with it. It'll be really
Yeah.
if John or Kathleen can respond to that question, but yeah, frankly, we've prepped for next week, so
Okay.
we're ready.
All right, done with that. We added open discussion at the end of this meeting. Does anybody have anything at this point?
Oh, a lot of questions on road closures and winter. Is everything gonna be open or what's not gonna be open?
No, everything is not going to be open. The intersection of First and Alder up to Second Street will remain closed. Also, the section between Sixth and Seventh with no traffic signal being there will also remain closed. The other streets, as we feel that we can open those up, we certainly will do that. But as far as Alder Street goes, you are certainly going to have some closures through the winter months.
Northcliffe, Northcliffe and Highway South.
Highway North.
Olympic Highway North will remain open with launch construction getting out of the project they've indicated by Thanksgiving. That will remain open. Pavetta would not have any construction going on up there. Northcliffe certainly will be closed periodically. They still have to make the connection to the system off of the temporary line that comes down the hill section after they get through the intersection of First and Alder.
So they're working through the winter.
They absolutely are.
You have some working days left?
We need to keep them moving.
Okay. Any other discussion? All right, we're adjourned.